Drama. If one could use only one word to summarize the art, literature, and music of the Baroque era, it would have to be drama. From Shakespeare's plays to Cervantes' Don Quixote to Jonathan Swift's 18th century Gulliver Travels, drama defined the creative spirit of the time. The difference is clear in sculptures of the biblical David displayed on your screen. The image on the left is of Michelangelo's Renaissance sculpture of 1504. David stands, composed, contemplating his fate. Bernini's Baroque David of 1623, to the right, on the other hand, is ready to hurl his slingshot at Goliath, his muscles tense, his mouth determined. Watch this drama unfold as we survey Baroque historical contexts and defining developments in this video. The Baroque period was an age of absolutism, where European political and economic power was concentrated in the hands of a few. This map of Europe in 1713 shows the dominance of the monarchs of France, England, Spain, Austria, and Russia. The least controlled lands were the Germanic states. The 30 Years' War, which had raged between 1618 and 1648, had brought great destruction to this portion of Europe. It is estimated that at least 1/3 of the population died during the war. Although still small on the early 18th century map, eventually the Prussian state, under leaders such as Frederick the Great, would rise to control the Germanic lands and much of Poland. Absolute monarchs, such as Louis XIV of France, built pleasure palaces such as Versailles, and in addition to hosting spectacles of art, music, and dance, also supported new scientific inquiry. In the early 16th century, Galileo had proved what Copernicus had earlier theorized, that the Earth really did revolve around the sun and not vice versa. 50 years later, Isaac Newton worked out the system of gravity and, contemporary with Leibniz, the laws of calculus. At this time, there was a new belief in the power of music to evoke basic human affects or passions, such as sadness, joy, anger, love, fear, and excitement. Descartes and others theorized about the role of animal spirits, such as blood, phlegm, green bile, and black bile, in resultant emotions. A controversy between composers Artusi and Claudio Monteverdi led the latter to theorize a musical prima practica based on the style of Palestrina and a seconda practica. The seconda practica allowed for unorthodox treatment of dissonance and rhythmic modulation and was declared superior by Monteverdi for eliciting the emotional swings of a madrigal such as his own Cruda Amaryllis from 1600. Listen to Cruda Amaryllis now before moving on. Contemporary with the music of John Dowland, Giulio Caccini published solo madrigals with the first printed use of figured bass and basso continuo. YouTube has several lovely recordings of Vedrò il mio sol for you to choose from. Composers wrote idiomatic music tailored to the capacities of the virtuoso violinist or singer, devising notation for ornaments and encouraging singers and instrumentalists to improvise. By the mid-17th century, composers and audiences had developed a taste for concerted music, that is, music that brought together several different performing forces such as soloists, choral ensembles, and instruments, or music that brought together different styles. The most important development of the early Baroque was the invention of opera, around 1600 in central Italy. The discussions of wealthy intellectuals of the Florentine Camerata spread south to Rome and north to Mantua on the River Po. There, in Mantua, Claudio Monteverdi produced the first major opera, Orfeo, at the court in 1607. Like many early operas, it told the story of this mythological man who calmed the animals and descended into the underworld on the power of his music. Disenfranchised by what they perceived to be the limited emotional power of the prima pratica of their time, the Florentine Camerata read ancient Greek accounts of melos, or melody, moving the affections of the listener. They believed that Greek drama had been sung throughout in a declamatory style midway between song and speech. From the Florentine Camerata's conversations with composers came the invention of the style of recitative, solo speech-like melody sung over chordal accompaniment called basso continuo. Recitative was combined with metrical accompanied songs called arias, orchestral overtures and interludes, and dance numbers in entirely sung drama. Opera was born. Early opera was performed for nobles in palatial settings. By the end of the 17th century, however, large cities from Rome and Venice and Milan to Paris, Vienna, and London had opera houses open to the public. The French public preferred operas with numerous dance numbers and spurned the unnaturalness of Italian castrati. The Brits loved to listen to the vocal virtuosity and power of the castrati. They, however, eventually chose 18th century ballad opera in the English language over Italian productions. This led composers such as Handel to write oratorios, sacred opera that was performed in concert without acting sets or costumes. Oratorio performances were especially popular during Lent, when dramatic entertainment was prohibited. The Baroque period also saw the birth of the orchestra, which was initially used to accompany court spectacle and opera. Baroque orchestras tended to be smallish ensembles of 10 to 20 instrumentalists, predominantly strings, with a few accompanying wind instruments and percussion. Absolute monarchs in France and England had their own string bands, and some German municipalities, such as Jena, had town collegium musicum. By the end of the Baroque period, composers were writing compositions that might be played by orchestras in concerts, such as concertos and orchestral suites. Orchestral music was often accompanied by harpsichord. Solo keyboard music for harpsichord and organ also reached a new prominence during the Baroque period. Before you move on to the next video presentation, make sure you've listened to the music discussed in this video introduction to the Baroque period.